Hi, everybody. Welcome to our November show. And let me get Rosann here. You might notice that we have a special guest, Chris. And Rosann, you know Chris.
Yes, I was privileged to meet Chris Smith when he was with True Seeds and when he had beginning his Utopian Seed project. And some of my students and I took a field trip to see him, and he introduced us to the term of regenerative agriculture. And it really changed the way that we did our little seed demonstration garden. Now, our little project is tiny compared to what Chris does. um, I met him originally as when he published his book, The Whole Okra, WHOLE, and I just
Mhm.
that a British person came and fell in love with okra because I'm trying to get Southern people to fall in love with okra. I also appreciate about Chris that he lives his work. He's not a theoretical seed saver, if there is such a thing. He gets his hands dirty, and his whole project is about, um, real life work. Chris, I would love for you to talk about also what you've been doing with Helene, because the way you've been sourcing the food from local farmers. The problems with the sludge that had no idea how that would affect our agriculture. And I think the heartbreak for me is, you're in the middle of one of the most agro diverse areas in the world. And now there's the sludge and there's this loss. So, ooh, deep breath. So, what you're doing is awesome, and we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, uh, there's um, there's a lot there in that short introduction.
Yeah.
So I guess let's dive straight into like the immediate, because that kind of feels like where my brain has been
Sure, sure.
for the last month, and we can dig into more of what the Utopian Sea Project does and all is about. But yeah, we're like about a month past
Mhm.
like the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history since Katrina, or maybe actually now the deadliest. And yeah, it's been pretty horrific in Western North Carolina and other regions. And basically, a crazy amount of rain caused our major waterways to flood way above anything that we've seen in living history, and maybe even beyond. And yeah, the catastrophic destruction has taken out lots of lives and infrastructure, and then moved human waste and chemicals all over the place, including into our farmlands and soils, and that's
And
going to
can I
an
ask
impact.
you a question? Where are you located at?
So I'm in Leicester, North Carolina, which is about 15 minutes northwest of Asheville, North Carolina.
And is your farm okay?
Yeah, yeah. It's been interesting to see how the hurricane presented itself in the region. We in Leicester, I think, got off lightly. We're not close to any major waterways, so we didn't get the catastrophic flooding. The wind came through. We had lots of trees down. We had lots of power lines down. We had folks out here in kind of the rural area without food and power for not food, water and power for a good few weeks.
Mhm.
Personally, I'm closer to a main road, and we got power back within 48 hours. So personally, I got away really lightly. Our farms had some flooding and some wind damage, but very minor compared to other regions.
And the recovery, what you're working with the Utopian Seed Project to help with the recovery? And what is the Utopian Seed Project?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're a young nonprofit, so we're in our fifth year right now, and we set ourselves up to be like a crop trialing, variety trialing regional nonprofit. We wanted to look at agrobiodiversity in the region, believing that there wasn't enough of it. We were so
Mhm.
into monoculture and single varieties, and we wanted to explore that, like the beautiful diversity that is out there, both on a variety and a crop level. And the reason we wanted to have more agrobiodiversity in our food system, and one of the like core tenets of the Utopian Sea Project, is that we wanted to have a more climate resilient food system. So more diversity in the food system equates to more resilience, so that when we have temperature extremes, or now I can say like heavy rainfall, hurricanes,
Yeah.
how does our food system and farm system bounce back? How can we weather those storms, knowing that climate change is bringing more intense, more chaotic weather? And one of the answers is more diversity in the food system can allow us to cope with the more chaotic weather that we're going to experience. So that's kind of like the core of the Utopian Sea Project is celebrating more agrobiodiversity in the region.
We probably have no idea yet of how many farms, homesteads are gone from the Helene mudslides. But there is infrastructure such as your organization to help them get back. And is this something that the Utopian Seed Project will do? Is provide seeds next spring to try and get back to these homesteads? I heard recently too, as far as even bees. We talk about farm animals, we talk about crops, but even bees have left the area. And is this something that the Utopian Seed Project kind of partners with as well for locals?
Yeah, that question's come up quite a lot in terms of like the seed loss and distribution.
Mm-hmm.
The Utopian Seed Project is a research and education nonprofit. So we grow on 2 trial sites in the region to explore, experiment, and then educate around that diversity. So we have never been a production level farm. We just don't have that much space. And in many ways, we haven't been like a direct service farm, right? We don't grow food to feed people. We're trying to change the whole system to be more sustainable. Maybe so we can get to a point where we don't have to have that would be an interesting future. So in many ways, we are kind of like a background organization that is supporting the people that are doing the work to feed the people. But in the crisis mode in post Helene, we kind of pivoted pretty quickly because we were like, well, we are positioned and we are lucky that we're not damaged ourselves, that we can support people more directly. So we have 4 employees, and 2 of them were in kind of like direct water distribution mode, and we said go for it. They took the farm truck, they took some water tanks, and we started distributing water. And then our culinary director and myself stayed in Leicester and started raising money to purchase food off local farmers that were suffering. They didn't have a market, and then started giving that away in collaboration with other community leaders to people that really needed the food. So we kind of pivoted pretty quickly to doing more of the direct service stuff. And I think on the back end of this, there's a definite need there to have rural food sovereignty. And it really came to the foreground that we weren't in any way equipped or resourced or networked to be able to deal with this kind of emergency. And one of the lasting thoughts in my brain was, like, why did it take an extreme disaster for us to come together as a community to feed people? It was great to see that we could come together and feed people without a cost and without asking for anything back. But there were lots of hungry people in Leicester and North Carolina before this hurricane, and there will be lots of hungry people after the recovery efforts have finished. So can we reimagine the system so that we have a network of people that can better support our own community members all the time, and not just when there's a disaster hanging around and money flowing in? So I think on the back side of this, the Utopian Sea Project will continue to work towards rural food sovereignty we'll have a program that is more direct. We're thinking of it as the Leicester Food Coalition, where we will have a bit more of direct impact.
I love that. I was just going to say, I don't know, Rosann, I got chills just talking about this, because sometimes when something bad happens, and this is kind of an Appalachian thing, something bad happens, you always come and rise out of it better. You find other ways to improve. And I can imagine your education part of it is going to be quite needed in the next year or two, especially spring, especially as people get their lands back. I can see that the Utopian Seed Project is going to be quite busy with the education, and then also your side project. So thank you from us for
Yeah,
he's doing them.
Chris, I think what Sandy and I really want to do with this webcast, as well as the larger picture of her webcast Ancestral Roads, is change the narrative
Yes.
of Appalachia. How we talk about it, how we regard it. If it's conceived in popular notions as way back in the day in a place far away, then that we can't use that part of deep culture that is solid and good and resilient. We can't use that for our future because we're regarding Appalachia as back in the day.
Yeah.
And so we decided before you came on that we were voting you in as an Appalachian because you and Utopian Seed Project, that is embodying the work of deep culture. Deep culture in Appalachia says, and most of the time we don't even examine if it's articulated, but it says, help your neighbors, whether you like them or not, because there'll come a time that you need help. And the idea of being, my grandparents and great grandparents, they may not have known the word food sovereignty or resistance, but they lived it. They lived it. So I'm really proud of the way that you're bringing these Appalachian values in a very contemporary context. I think Appalachia.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say there was a real cool concept that came. I saw it. We actually lost cell and internet for a week or so, but once things started coming back online, there was a video I saw of somebody talking about the idea of it was like a hashtag that was "Hold Your Holler," and that really resonated. It was in a world that's so fragmented and disconnected, and it can be paralyzing to know what to do. This person was just standing up and saying, just hold your holler, who's around you, what are the needs, and how can you react? And that's what Terry and I had come to our own conclusion ourselves. We were there's so much insanity right now, but we can just support our farmers that we know and give food to people that need it. And that felt very, very basic and very, very simple, but very powerful. And lots of people joined in with that effort. So yeah, we were just trying to hold our holler. And if everybody holds their holler, then we'll be in a much better world.
Yeah, I love that hashtag. That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about your story that sometimes you share at your when you book readings about how you as a British person came here and fell in love with okra? That's just so remarkable to me.
Yeah, because a lot of people here do not like it. You'll find New Orleans, around that area, they love it, but most people, too slimy. They will not like it. You'd never had okra before?
I had the too slimy version. Or not. It may not have even been the too slimy version. It was a lot of people complain about the too slimy version, but what an equal amount of people complain about is just bad okra. And sadly, you can do okra wrong. And so when I visited America in 2006, maybe earlier in that 2004, but I'd gone to a Greasy Spoon, and a friend had fed us fried okra as kind of I don't know if they were trying to joke with us, but it was just bad, frozen pre-breaded okra. Old oil fat. It was not good. And I think a lot of people have that experience and never give okra a second chance. But when I returned to America to get married, so this is 2012, 2013, I had the opportunity to grow my own garden in America, and I was super excited about it because it's much warmer here. There's more daylight, less cloudy days. So you can grow so much more stuff in America. I was sweet potatoes, chili peppers, tomatoes without a greenhouse, peanuts, all these things that you couldn't grow in England. And one of those things was okra. And I hadn't, apart from that one experience that I'd pretty much forgotten about, I'd never really had any interaction with okra. And I remember that first year being so excited about that garden and all these new crops. And what I quickly realized during that first growing season is, yes, you can grow all these things, but this environment also grows really hungry raccoons and and rabbits and insane deer that can jump over houses and stuff, and every single blight and fungal pathogen. So that first garden was a bit of a mess. Like everything pretty much died at some point, apart from the okra. The okra was just incredible. I, by sheer luck, planted it next to a balcony, and by the end of the season, I had to stand on the balcony, like a second-story balcony, to actually harvest the okra. So it's so productive and such a beautiful plant. If you've grown okra, it's like a hibiscus relative with beautiful flowers and deep red stem. And I just really fell head over heels in love with it. And I was working for So True Seed at the time, so I was going to a lot of agricultural conferences, and somewhat naively was just telling everyone how much I was loving this plant okra. And at least half the people that I spoke to had the very reaction we started with, which was like, "Oh, okra!
Yeah.
Like okra, it's slimy, it's horrible." And I just was like, "What's wrong with you people? Like, this is a productive, delicious, resilient plant. Half of you don't like it because it's slimy." It was just like, it didn't make sense in my head. So very, very early on in my American life, I started giving a presentation that I called "In Defense of Okra," where I basically just stand up and tell everyone why I loved okra for a while, and that's what led to like a deeper research to kind of basically just justify my love of okra. You don't have to dig very deep to find a lot of good reasons why okra is awesome. And that's what led to me writing the book. And here we are today, still talking about okra, which is, I'm not complaining about.
Yes. I tell you, to me, okra is one of the Appalachian stories. When you think of all the in-migration to Appalachia, all the various ethnicities, all the survival mechanisms. To me, it is just one of our crops. And I love it that it's finally getting the press it deserves. I remember when I first met Chris, he had okra oil. Yeah. And so when we think about, we're so narrowly, the corn oil, the canolas, the olives, all the little things that we can go to a grocery store and get. And we forget, what we have, at our own disposal, and what we've had for generations and generations and generations. And I love the idea of thinking that when you forcefully remove a people, and this happened here in North Georgia with the Cherokees. I mean, maybe what they could take was a seed they could stuff in their pockets. And so that enslaved people who were able to come with some seeds in their pockets, and how that has endured through the years. And, Appalachian foodways, as we all know, I mean, it's a mishmash of loves of food and what we can grow locally and what we can also preserve. I'm just so proud of what you've done, Chris. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, there was one anecdote that you said, I'm circling back to Helene because it's really on my mind. You talked about how proud the little kids were just to get an apple after Helene. And something about that just touched me.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually, because like, obviously deeply grateful for all the relief efforts and food that's flooding in, but it's all packaged food. It's all cans, like crackers, like just stuff that's all wrapped in plastic and processed pre-packaged food. And to some extent that makes sense. It's transportable, it's storage. A lot of people didn't have refrigeration or the ability to cook for a large part. The military rations were available and all that sort of stuff. So I definitely get it. But at the same time, we, like, around the corner, we have a great farm, Gaining Ground Farm, that has a farm stand, and they primarily sell to the Asheville restaurants, and there was no restaurants open. A lot of them had been destroyed. And so they were struggling as farmers, even though they weren't directly affected by the hurricane. And we had this population of folks that either didn't have any work or had lost their supplies of food through loss of refrigeration and were just struggling. And so it was a pretty easy decision for us to get some money together and go and buy all the food we could from the farmers and take it to these distribution centers that had lots of food but didn't have any fresh food. And people were just like, over and over again, they were like, "Oh my god, fresh food!" And
Oh.
yeah, the children that just like swarmed us for apples, folks that were so excited to see. We managed to get some. These weren't local farmer grown, but some oranges and bananas from another local supplier, and bring them to these distribution efforts. And people were just like so excited to see those things. Tomatoes, we just had the tail end of the tomato season. We managed to get about 50 pounds of okra from a farmer, again, tail end of the season. And we set up at a farmer's market, the first farmer's market to set up again. And we fried okra for 6 hours. We fried okra.
Oh, wow.
Just handing out fried okra to folks for free. And again, it was just like that, like homey feel of quality, fresh food meant a lot to people. Like at that point, there was a lot of food kicking around, but there was no fresh food, or they didn't have the ability to cook it themselves. And there's something about that kind of like realizing why our farmers are so important, and why supporting, seasonal, local, regional produce is like, again, let's not just support them when we're in the middle of a disaster. Like these folks need us all the time, and they stepped up in COVID. They've stepped up during this hurricane. Like that's the bedrock of our food system. And sometimes we forget that when our supermarkets open 24/7 and just around the corner. So yeah, it's a good reminder to support the people that support us.
Well, you have a good point too, because a lot of times people will go to a grocery store and just start getting those shelf stable items. Hamburger Helper's is not helpful. There's no hamburger usually at a food bank, and you've got rice-a-roni that requires maybe butter or oil, things like that. So as you're buying these boxes thinking it's going to be helpful at times, it really isn't. But what you just described, farmers helping farmers. Really,
Yes.
you went to buy the local farmers produce that he had that was going to go to waste anyway, and the restaurants were closed. In the fresh food, and that kind of goes into a whole different tangent of mine about diet and nutrition in America as well. But the fresh food, you're right, if we don't support our farmers or local farmers, they have to go, they have to sell. And that's something that we, as Appalachia, I don't want that to ever happen, because that's my culture as family of farmers. It's just really amazing you describing how just okra for 6 hours was something that felt home, felt normal. Somebody cooking for somebody who needed relief. That's a gift.
Yeah. And so many of the local chefs stepped up as well. There was like these kind of like relief kitchens popping up all over the place. And again, some of my farm crew were like taking we had all these big tanks of water that we're able to fill from a local well and take to these downtown chefs, and then try and get them the fresh produce. So there was this just wonderful big mobilization to try and support everyone. And so there was a lot of like really heartwarming activity behind it all. And now that kind of the immediate crisis is over and we're looking at this, what are the secondary and tertiary crises, and how do we come back from this in a way that makes us stronger than before? I think we do need to have a real like internal reckoning and intelligent conversation about the fact that even though it's been tagged a 1,000-year flood, a 30,000-year flood, we're all going to be very stupid if we think it's not going to happen for another 1,000 years. Like we're in the thick of a major climate disruption. We're experiencing the effects of it. Farmers know it, even if they don't give it the right name. And yeah, we've just got to be very clever about how we move forward and what systems do we have, so that when these events do happen again, we're in a strong position to have. Well, for the Utopian Sea Project, we say we want to have food security in a changing climate, and this has really been an experience that highlights that need.
Well, you're not kidding. That's another huge hot topic. I last year I had interviewed an author about Appalachia on the Table, and food security is such a need for more discussion in Appalachia, but around the world, just in general. And then when you bring in the climate change, that makes it more immediate. And then we bring in what happened with Helene. it's heartbreaking that we did not have these discussions beforehand. It's shocking and heartbreaking, but now, again, maybe out of bad, something good will happen, and there will be more topics about this. I hope you keep us abreast if there are more topics on a national level, at least, or a global level. Let us know, because I think Rosann and I would love to be dialed in to those conversations. And, just as a listener at this point, to know that food security and climate change do go hand in hand.
Very
Yeah,
much.
and
Yes.
Appalachia's place in that. I
It
think
does.
that we are positioned in so many ways to be a leader. And Chris, one of the things that I like about your operation, it's a systemic thinking. Our little garden. I was thinking about our students. I was thinking about our local schools that needed our community. It's very, very narrow. I was holding the holler and didn't even know that word.
Mhm.
But there needs to be something like Utopian Seed Project who can think in large ways and hold that space for something bigger than this little place and this little place and this little place. And that's what I appreciate you becoming a leader in that field, and helping us think of those big questions. And what it means, also what it means if we don't answer
Yeah,
those big
that's a big
questions.
question. And did you know this? You were going to be put in this light and this way. Leave Helene out of it for a bit. When you moved to America, did you know that you were going to start to become a force? Did you know that you didn't know you're going to write about okra? And I want to let everybody know that you are a James Beard winner for the book. And I bet you that you probably didn't know when you came to America, that this would how your life is going to be transformed.
I didn't even know James Beard, when that award was announced. I didn't even know I'd been nominated for an award, and I didn't know who James Beard was. I was like,
I love it. I love it.
Growing up, and people kept on saying, "You've got a James Beard," and I'm like, enough people sent me messages that I was like, "Oh, maybe this is something." So yeah, I didn't, and I don't, and it doesn't even really matter too much, right? Like we're here, we're doing what we can, and if I'm pleased that I'm here at the right time and that people want to listen and participate and it resonates with folks. But I think Rosann said this right at the beginning. We are a hands in the earth organization. We set ourselves up to farm sites, and we wanted to be able to. It was very important to us that we did the real work in the field regionally, so that when we spoke about it, we could speak with like deep authenticity. So this isn't theoretical. It's not peer-reviewed research papers. It's like people and farmers and community doing the work, and then we talk about it, and people seem to be listening, and that's fantastic. And I'm pleased that people want to listen, but that's not necessarily what's important. What's important to me is that we're doing the work locally and having a local impact. And then if we prove a system that could be replicated in other regions, and then we can collaborate with those folks in other regions, then that's the bigger vision. But what's important to me is that we can serve our local community first.
Chris,
and
can you tell?
Hold on, Rosann, real quick. Let me interrupt you. If anybody has any questions for Chris, please let us know. And Chris, I do know that I don't think our watchers are going to let you get away without sharing how you like to prepare okra, but we'll do that in a few moments. Let me give the microphone back to Rosann.
Chris, I was just wondering if you could tell us how we could help you. How can we help the Utopian Seed Project? What is it? Make a donation? Is it send some seeds, if not to you, to somebody? What and how can we help?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things there, and I'll go backwards. The backwards one is the seeds. The recommendations coming out are that folks who have been flooded shouldn't be planting for 60 days while soil tests are done. Are there heavy metals? Is there chemical contamination? Even just baseline fecal matter needs to break down before we start planting food crops. So seeds arriving right now actually aren't that helpful. It's also, we're going into winter. So I think it's a generous thought, but it's not necessarily an immediate need. However, enough people have reached out to me about that I haven't quite got a system in place, but I'm going to speak with my folks about maybe we can receive those seeds over the winter and then be ready to redistribute in the spring, as that's a need down the line. So I guess, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Follow along there, like at the Utopian Seed Project. And when I get organized on that one, I'll put out an announcement on how we can facilitate that. So if you've got seeds and that's the way you can support, then I think there will be a need, just not ready for that yet. The immediate need is obviously a financial one. Farmers are suffering, which is why we're trying to buy food off them. As farmers markets open up, we're going to the farmers markets, and I bought $400 worth of winter squash off a farmer just before the weekend. So that type of thing, to continue keeping farmers solvent through this and then feeding the folks while they get back on their ground. So that there's a short-term financial need that we've received donations for. But pretty quickly, we are moving into a world where we're thinking about this Leicester Food Coalition, and we'll have a deeper fundraising goal around that. So if there's lots of awesome places to donate money to help with various relief efforts. If this specific rural food sovereignty project resonates with folks and they want to support us directly on that, then we are seeking donations to fund that project in terms of like expanded staffing, networking, gathering the folks together. It's going to be a very much a community facilitated approach to solving our regional food needs. So yeah, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We'll obviously take any financial donations folks want to throw at us. We'll do good work with it. So yeah, seeds in the future, money now, and everything's
you
still
answered
kind of
about the winter crops as well. Somebody asked about winter crops. I think you just mentioned that, and you just bought some winter crops.
Winter crop, the 60-day thing is going to be a challenge for folks. Okay. So they're saying just plant cover crops and wait 60 days before you plant anything. And so 60 days from now puts us into the depths of the winter. So most people are going to be looking at a spring planting at this point.
Okay. And then our next question or comment was, congrats on the award. And have you tested the soil? And I'm not sure which soil I was talking about, but I'm going to ask, have you tested this? Have you had any to test the soil in your farm? And are they actively starting to test the soil in the areas that were damaged?
Yeah, good questions. So not my farm. One farm didn't get any flooding. It was just wind damage at that farm. The other one got minor flooding, but everything upstream of us is kind of Pisgah National Forest. So we don't have personal concerns about that. A lot of other areas do. There's, toxic sludge and all these types of things that you may have seen on the news. They're just beginning to get into soil testing. I spoke to Mike, he's a farmer, Michael Rayburn, this morning, who is at Buncombe County Soil and Water and has been kind of like leading the effort on soil remediation efforts. And he said the Raleigh, which is where our kind of NC State soil testing folks are, they're sending a task force to the region today, actually, to start soil testing tomorrow. They're going to look at water testing to see what contaminants are in the water, and then watersheds to see like which water systems might have contaminated which areas, and then they'll do spot soil testing to look at heavy metals, gasoline, and that type of thing. He did mention that they tested in Marshall, which is kind of downstream of a lot of things and kind of got hit pretty hard. And he said the initial results from Marshall were more promising than he thought they may have been. So I think it's a wait and see at this point, but definitely soil testing is like that's the process. It's kind of like wait, soil test, cover cropping in the meantime, and then what remediation efforts can be put in place. Is that phytoremediation, microremediation? Is it biochar? Like what are the scientists saying around this in terms of how we can clean up these soils? And then the last thing to add to that is there's all the contaminants, but what I think a lot of people, and I didn't realize before writing that Guardian article, was just the sheer amount of physical junk in the soil. Yeah. So it's not just about microbiology, it's about like entire cars, houses, like we had a huge Plebe Urban Winery was a huge warehouse that we held an event in 6 months ago. Literally doesn't exist anymore. It's been like obliterated and flushed downstream, and is probably disintegrated into various fields around the place. So there's a massive cleanup task in terms of just physically pulling stuff out of the soil before you can even start thinking about, do I have arsenic? Yeah.
Okay, we have so Erin mentioned that she can't convince her southern husband that there are ways to prepare okra without slime, but hold that thought. And then Joe responded, I'm the same, Erin, but one day I learned to fry it. Not my favorite food, but fried is good. And so what is your favorite way to prepare okra?
Well, first of all, I would like to throw down the gauntlet that real Southern people should embrace the slime. I'll let the hate mail roll in on the back of that one. And then, if you can't get past the slime, which I guess everyone's different, so that's okay, then there are ways to mitigate the slime. And that's either like a high heat preparation, which is why frying often helps, or an acidic preparation, which is why people often cook it with tomatoes. Tomatoes and okra is a dish, and the acidity in the tomatoes breaks down some of the sliminess. And then pickled okra isn't as slimy. And even if you have like okra that might be slimy and you squirt a little bit of lime on it in your mouth, and that lime can kind of like break down a little bit of the slime. So some kind of acid really helps with okra. My favorite way to cook it is actually a fairly low slime method.
We're going to trademark that.
I like slicing it lengthways, so like on the long edge of the okra, maybe into halves or quarters, and then just adding a little bit of oil, an olive oil is fine, and a little bit of salt, and just laying it out on a roasting pan and putting it in the oven at about 375 to 400 Fahrenheit. 20-25 minutes, and it starts to crispen up a little bit. It goes a little bit crunchy, maybe even a little bit brown, so some of the sweetness comes out. And basically it's okra fries or okra chips, but it's not fried, right? It's roasted at a high temperature. And if you put that on the table in just a big bowl and have a little bit of lime squirted on top, or a nice aioli type of dip to put it in, then my young children love that. Like, I've never found anybody that doesn't give okra a second look if you prepare it that way. So it's a really good way to convert people that don't like okra to okra, but it's also super quick to prepare and very tasty.
Okay, and then we've got another one. Do you have a favorite variety of okra to grow and eat? And is it heirloom?
It's kind of like picking your favorite child. You shouldn't really do it. We've grown hundreds and hundreds of varieties of okra to this point, and they've all got something unique and beautiful about them. I do kind of gravitate to a certain type of okra, which is the pods that are round okra, so they don't have any ridges. And I like the pods that have the red blushing on them, so the kind of green pods with a little bit of red blushing. So in terms of what the okra looks like, I like that one. And then I've got a few varieties that taste really good too. If I had to throw out two varieties that I do really enjoy and often grow, one would be Puerto Rican Everblush, which is a variety sold by Southern Exposure Seed Exchange that we've been like working on and selecting for 5 or 6 years now. And then there's a Tennessee heirloom, which is called Aunt Hetty's Red. And it's a beautiful, like kind of meaty, dark red. The plant is a stunning variety of okra, and So True Seed sells that variety. So Aunt Hetty's Red, or Aunt Hetty's Red, and Puerto Rican Everblush.
There we go. That'll be it. Rosann, did you have any more questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to those two organizations that are just stalwart keepers of these seeds. And one way to support this work in North Carolina is with purchasing those heirloom seeds. I think So True Seeds, and we're not advertising for them, don't get any money for saying this, but I think part of their if you buy a pack of seeds from them, some of that money is going toward relief efforts. And southern exposure has great seeds too. So in your own gardens, I could talk about seeds forever. We could turn this into a seed podcast, but definitely that's when we talk about changing our large food system. This tiny little step could be using heirloom seeds. It's a tiny little step that's really not that much harder or that much expensive than getting seeds, from your Ace Hardware. And I love it that there was an aunt somewhere that got that seed named after her.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Plus, if you've got kids and if you let that okra dry, they love the hit. They love the challenge of those little okra balls. They will go everywhere in your classroom. I will say that. But when children start to understand this is where food comes from, there's this thing called seeds, and as it's reaching its physiological maturity, it may not look anything like it looked when we would eat it. So there's just a whole way to teach, especially like middle graders. They'll eat anything. So I learned that dried okra, harvesting dried okra, and for activities you can also paint it and make a Christmas decoration out of it. So I always saved back some of our okra that we were drying for our seed garden for our middle graders who would come. Yeah.
And I just want to point out that we normally do go over the calendar for planting by the signs during our show, but Rosann and I have put that aside for Helene coverage and also for special guests such as Chris. If you want the November calendar, it is linked down below, as well as the links that we've talked about for Chris by his book down below, as well as the Utopian Seed Project in your personal blog, I believe. Blue plus Yellow is also linked down below.
I've not written for that in a while, but yes, there's some fun articles there too.
There really are. And if you want to get to know a little bit more about Chris and his life on the farm, definitely check out the blog. I thought it was really indicative of farming. Like you said, boots on the ground, hands in the dirt. This is what it's like to live and work on a farm. So definitely check out Blue plus Yellow blog. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is fun.
Anything that we can do to help, please reach out and let us know. I know that you've got a lot of things that you're thinking about in the future. So any way that we can help promote and get the word out, we would love to. Rosann is such a huge fan of yours. She's wanted you to come on the show for such a long time. So thanks, Rosann, for arranging this. And Chris, if there's anything we can say, is thank you for helping the farmers as well. They're going to need it up there.
And
thank you, Chris. Good to see you again.
Well,
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining.